The fate of a century-old legacy, a deal valued at nearly $1 billion, was slowly suffocating in the oppressive silence of a private room at Chicago's most venerable steakhouse. On one side of the heavy oak table sat Wallace Thorne, a titan of industry whose face seemed carved from granite and disapproval, and his son Landon, a man whose ambition was eclipsed only by his meticulously gelled hair. On the other side sat a young Japanese woman, Akari Sato, whose silence they mistook for timidity, whose traditional deference they read as weakness. They smirked and whispered their strategies in plain English, confident in their power, certain they were playing a game she couldn't possibly comprehend. They believed they held all the cards. What they didn't know was that their every condescending remark, their every whispered deception, was being absorbed and understood by the one person in the room they had already dismissed as part of the decor. The waitress. The air in the president's room at the Gilded Steer was thick with the scent of aged leather, expensive bourbon, and unspoken hostility. It was a chamber built for men like Wallace Thorne. Walls paneled with wood dark as dried blood, a bronze chandelier shaped like a bull's horns, casting a severe golden light, and a single massive window that looked out not on the glittering skyline, but on the cold, dark expanse of Lake Michigan, a view that promised power and isolation in equal measure. Wallace Thorne, in his late 60s, was the CEO of Thorne Global, a conglomerate that swallowed smaller companies with the casual brutality of a shark. His gray hair was a perfect helmet, his suit a declaration of wealth so profound it no longer needed to be flashy. His cold, pale eyes missed nothing and valued little. Beside him, Landon, his heir apparent and executive vice president, was a study in modern corporate predation. His suit was Italian and sharp, his smile was a weapon, but his eyes held the same ancestral hunger as his father's. They were there to acquire Sato Textiles, a legendary Kyoto-based firm renowned for its artisanal weaving techniques that were coveted by the world's top fashion houses. Across the table was the source of their mounting frustration, Akari Sato. She was not the aging patriarch they had expected to bully into retirement. She was perhaps 28, her posture as straight and delicate as a calligraphy brushstroke. A simple dark blue dress, a single pearl earring in each ear. Her entire presence was an exercise in minimalist elegance that seemed to mock the room's heavy-handed opulence. Her grandfather, the company's founder and a living national treasure in Japan, had fallen ill. Akari, his heir and the company's chief designer, had been sent in his stead. Accompanying her was her aide, Mr. Tanaka, an older, impeccably dressed man who sat a respectful pace behind her, his face a mask of polite neutrality. The problem had begun with the first handshake. After the initial introductions, facilitated by Mr. Tanaka, Akari Sato had spoken, but her words were not the hesitant, accented English they had anticipated. They were Japanese, spoken in a voice as soft as falling snow and just as incomprehensible to the Thornes. Mr. Thorne, Mr. Tanaka had translated, his own English flawless. Ms. Sato expresses her gratitude for your hospitality and compliments the historic ambiance of this establishment. Wallace had grunted, a sound that was his version of a pleasantry. Of course, tell her we're eager to get down to business. Time is money. As the waiter, a stoic, older man who had served presidents, poured their water, the conversation began its agonizing crawl. Wallace and Landon would deliver a monologue on market synergy and supply chain integration, which Mr. Tanaka would dutifully summarize for Akari in a low murmur. She would listen intently, her dark eyes fixed on them, and then offer a brief, quiet response. Ms. Sato understands the logistical advantages, Mr. Tanaka would translate back. It was like trying to negotiate with a beautiful silent statue. Landon's manufactured charm was beginning to fray. He leaned toward his father, his hands shielding his mouth in a gesture of theatrical secrecy. What is this, Dad? Is she playing hard to get? This whole silent, deferential thing is an act. She's making us sweat. Wallace's lips thinned into a line of displeasure. Patience, Landon. It's a tactic, a cultural thing. They draw things out to test your resolve. We just need to be the alpha in the room. Don't let her set the pace. But it felt like more than a tactic. Akari Sato's gaze was unnervingly perceptive. She didn't just look at them. She seemed to be studying them, cataloging every impatient tap of Landon's fingers, every dismissive grunt from Wallace. She would occasionally pose a question directly to them in a stream of melodic Japanese, her head tilted slightly. Each time they would turn to Mr. Tanaka with a flicker of panicked irritation. She asks about the recent labor disputes at your manufacturing plant in Ohio, Mr. Thorne. Mr. Tanaka would translate, his face impassive. Wallace would stiffen. An internal matter, resolved. How would she even... And she notes the high turnover rate in your European acquisitions division, Mr. Landon Thorne. Mr. Tanaka would continue, relaying another of Akari's gentle inquiries. She is curious if that indicates a difficulty in integrating company cultures. Landon's smile would become a rictus. They were being x-rayed, their corporate flaws and hidden weaknesses exposed with surgical precision, and the woman holding the scanner was speaking a language that rendered their usual tools of intimidation and bluster completely useless. Their frustration was hardening into contempt. This was their turf, their city, their deal. They were the giants here, and this quiet foreign woman was making them feel small and foolish. Amelia adjusted the starched white apron over her simple black uniform, her movements a study in practiced efficiency. She was a ghost in this world of power and privilege, trained to be invisible, to exist only as a pair of hands that refilled a water glass or cleared a plate. Her job was to anticipate a need before it was voiced, to move without sound, to be present but unseen. But Amelia was a watcher. It was a skill honed by a lifetime of existing on the periphery. She saw the muscle twitching in Wallace Thorne's jaw, a tiny signal of his barely contained rage. She saw the way Landon Thorne's smile was a thin, brittle veneer over a chasm of insecurity. And most of all, she watched Akari Sato. To the Thornes, the young woman was a frustrating foreign puzzle. To Amelia, she was a quiet echo of home. Amelia's mother had been a Japanese woman who had met her American serviceman father near his base in Okinawa. He had died in a training accident before Amelia was born, and her mother, lost and alone in a country that was not her own, had passed away from a sudden illness when Amelia was just 5. She was raised by her maternal grandmother, her Obasan, who had come to America to care for her. They had lived in a tiny apartment in a working-class Chicago neighborhood, a small island of Japan in a sea of English. Her Obasan had never fully mastered the new language, so Japanese was the language of Amelia's childhood. It was the language of lullabies and fairy tales, of scoldings and comfort, of her grandmother's quiet wisdom and the scent of green tea that always filled their home. Now working 2 jobs to pay for her art history degree at the local university, those years felt like a different life. Here she was just Amelia, the quiet waitress. No one knew that the soft, flowing words spoken by Akari Sato were as clear to her as the clatter of silverware in the kitchen, and what she heard made her stomach clench. She heard the translations from Mr. Tanaka, and they were technically correct. But they were sterile, the bare skeletons of the words. They lacked the soul, the intricate layers of politeness, the unspoken warnings woven into every phrase Akari uttered. When Akari had asked about the labor disputes, her tone hadn't been merely curious. It was a formal, precise phrasing that subtly implied, I know you value profit over people, and I am concerned. When she'd mentioned Landon's high turnover rate, her choice of words wasn't an observation. It was a delicate but unmistakable expression of doubt, the kind one might use when questioning a partner's reliability. She was speaking in a highly formal, almost poetic dialect of Japanese, one that conveyed immense intelligence and a deep respect for tradition. Amelia watched as Landon, his patience exhausted, resorted to a new strategy, speaking loudly and slowly, as if Akari were a simpleton. We are offering a very good price, he boomed, gesturing with his hands. Big money for your company. Amelia physically flinched. The insult was so profound, so ignorant, that she felt a wave of second-hand shame. She saw Akari Sato's eyes for just a fraction of a second flicker with something that looked like profound disappointment. Not anger, but a deep, weary sadness. Mr. Tanaka's jaw tightened, but he dutifully translated Landon's boorish words. Akari responded, her voice still quiet, but with an edge of tempered steel that hadn't been there before. Mr. Tanaka translated, Ms. Sato understands the financial aspects of your offer. But what Akari had actually said was, please inform this noisy young man that the traditions of my grandfather are not a commodity to be purchased like cattle at an auction. Amelia nearly dropped the breadbasket she was refilling. She steadied herself against the dark wood wall, her heart hammering. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a slow-motion train wreck. These men, in their blind arrogance, were destroying a billion-dollar deal, and Akari Sato was letting them. She was calmly observing their disrespect, her silence a canvas onto which they were painting their own ugly portraits. The final, unforgivable breach came when Wallace Thorne, convinced the woman across from him was either hopelessly naive or deliberately obtuse, decided to discuss his final strategy with Landon openly at the table, as if Mr. Tanaka and Akari were not even there. All right, this charade is over, Wallace muttered, leaning across the table. Here's the final play. We'll present the final offer, but we're slipping in the legacy clause, Section 8C, the one that gives us full rights and royalties to all future designs developed by her or anyone at the company in perpetuity. She's so focused on honoring the past, she'll never see we're stealing her future. Landon grinned, a flash of predatory teeth. Brilliant. She won't have a clue. She's a designer and artist. She's not looking at the fine print. Tanaka will just translate whatever we tell him to. Amelia stood frozen by a service station, the polished silver of a water pitcher cold against her fingers. They were going to defraud her right in front of her, using her own culture's perceived politeness as a weapon against her. They saw a young woman, not a leader. They saw a foreigner, not the guardian of a priceless legacy. In that moment, Amelia felt the presence of her obasan in the room. She remembered her grandmother teaching her that in Japan, silence was not emptiness. It was a space for listening, for respect, for observing the true heart of a person. It was not a vacuum to be filled with brute force and arrogant noise. She looked at Akari Sato's face, at the profound, lonely intelligence in her eyes. It was the same look of quiet strength she had seen in her grandmother's eyes every day of her life. Her manager's words echoed in her mind. You are invisible, Amelia. Do not speak to the guests unless you are spoken to. Ever. It was the first and last rule of her employment. Breaking it meant instant dismissal. It meant her tuition payment would be impossible. It meant her dream of one day working in a museum, surrounded by the art she loved, would turn to dust. But then she heard Akari Sato speak again, her voice almost a whisper, a soft, sorrowful murmur to herself. Koko ni wa, kokoro o miru hito wa, enai no deshoka. Is there no one here who can see the heart of things? Amelia's decision was made. Her job, her tuition, her future. They felt insignificant compared to the colossal injustice unfolding in this dark, wood-paneled cage. She placed the water pitcher down with a soft, definitive click, smoothed her apron, and began to walk toward the table, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. As Amelia walked across the plush, wine-colored carpet, the ambient noise of the restaurant beyond the door seemed to dissolve into a distant hum. Each step was a conscious act of rebellion against every rule she had been taught. The world had narrowed to the four people at the table, locked in their standoff of arrogance and quiet dignity. Wallace and Landon Thorne were too engrossed in their self-congratulatory smirks to notice her approach. Mr. Tanaka's head was bowed slightly, his hands clasped in his lap, a picture of professional endurance. Only Akari Sato's head lifted, her dark eyes meeting Amelia's across the expanse of white linen and gleaming silver. In them, Amelia saw not just surprise, but a flicker of profound, questioning weariness. She stopped not at the side of the Thorns, but at a respectful distance from Akari's place at the table. She drew a slow, steadying breath, the conditioned air feeling thin in her lungs. This was the point of no return. She bowed. It was not the perfunctory nod of a server. It was a deep, formal bow from the waist, the saikairai, a gesture of utmost respect her grandmother had taught her was reserved for elders, for teachers, for those to whom you owed a great debt. A bow she hadn't performed in years. The act was so unexpected, so out of place, that it shattered the room's tense equilibrium. Wallace and Landon stopped talking, their heads snapping toward her. "What in God's name is this?" Wallace growled, his face clouding with fury. "Get us the check, girl, and get out." His voice trailed off as Amelia straightened up, looked directly at Akari Sato, and spoke. Her Japanese was flawless. It was the humble, formal dialect of her grandmother, the language of Kyoto's old families, clear as a temple bell on a winter morning. "Sato-sama," she began, using a form of address that bordered on reverence. "Watashi no burei o yurushi kudasai. Konoba ni oite ichi jugyoin ni shika sugimasen ga. Shikashi, kono yo na shitsurei o moku ni suru koto wa, kono mise no, そして私自身の名誉に関わることでございます。もしお許しいただければ、お役立ちできることがあるかと存じます。Forgive my unforgivable impudence. I am but a humble employee here. However, to stand by and witness this discourtesy is a stain upon this establishment and my own honor. If you would permit me, I believe I can be of assistance." The silence that followed was absolute, a stunned, deafening void. Wallace and Landon stared at her, their mouths literally hanging open. It was as if a piece of the furniture had suddenly begun to speak a foreign language. This girl, the one who had been silently refilling their water, the one whose existence they had barely registered, was speaking the very language that had been the source of their power and their frustration all evening. Mr. Tanaka's head shot up, his eyes wide with utter astonishment. He looked from Amelia to Akari, his stoic composure for the first time completely gone. But the most profound reaction came from Akari Sato herself. The mask of calm impassivity she had worn all night finally crumbled. Her eyes, which had held such lonely wisdom, suddenly shimmered and welled with tears. Her lips parted, and a small, choke sound escaped her, a sound of disbelief and of a soul-shattering relief. It was the sound of someone who had been lost in a foreign land, finally hearing a voice from home. She replied to Amelia, her own voice thick with emotion, yet still retaining its innate grace. "Anata, wakarimasu, no ka? You understand?" She gestured subtly toward the thorns. "Kotoba no ura ni aru imi o." The meaning behind the words. "Subete rikai shite orimasu, Sato-sama." Amelia replied, her own voice steady despite the adrenaline singing in her veins. "Watashi wa Kyoto no kotoba de sodachimashita. Anata no kotoba dake de naku, anata no kokoro mo kikoemasu." "I understand everything, Ms. Sato. I was raised with the words of Kyoto. I hear not only your words, but your heart." This exchange, lasting no more than 15 seconds, completely detonated the power structure in the room. Wallace and Landon Thorne were no longer in control. They were suddenly outsiders, locked out of a conversation that pulsed with more genuine meaning than anything they had managed in the past 2 hours. "What is she saying?" Landon demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion as he pointed an accusatory finger at Amelia. "Who the hell are you? What did you just say to her?" Amelia did not look at him. Her focus remained entirely on Akari. In that moment, she was no longer a waitress. She was a bridge, a shield, an interpreter of not just language, but of intent. Akari Sato, with a single tear now tracing a silent path down her cheek, gestured with a delicate hand toward the empty chair beside her. It was both an invitation and a command. She spoke again, a short, clear sentence in Japanese. Mr. Tanaka, finally finding his voice, translated for the bewildered Americans, though his eyes were fixed on Amelia with a look of undisguised awe. Ms. Sato requests that the young lady join them at the table." Landon scoffed. "Join them? She's the waitress. This is a billion-dollar negotiation, not a goddamn tea party." But Wallace Thorne, for all his brutishness, was a man who understood power, and he could feel it shifting in the room as tangibly as a change in barometric pressure. The quiet Japanese woman was no longer a passive enigma. She had found an ally, and that ally was the girl in the white apron. He fell silent, his mind racing, trying to compute this impossible new variable. Amelia hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then, with a quiet grace she didn't know she possessed, she pulled out the heavy oak chair and sat down. The world had just been turned upside down, and she was now at its epicenter. Seated at the vast oak table, the starched linen napkin feeling foreign and heavy in her lap, Amelia felt a dizzying sense of unreality. The crystal glasses, the heavy silver, the half-eaten porterhouse steaks, they were props from a life she served, not a life she lived. Yet the unwavering gaze of Akari Sato was an anchor, grounding her, imbuing her with a sense of purpose that overshadowed her fear. Wallace and Landon watched her, their faces a thunderous mask of confusion and outrage. This was a violation of the natural order of things as they understood it. "I demand an explanation," Wallace Thorne said, his voice a low growl. He directed the words at Mr. Tanaka, but his glare was fixed on Amelia. "What is going on here?" Before Mr. Tanaka could formulate a response, Akari addressed Amelia directly in Japanese, her voice now calm and infused with a quiet command. Amelia listened intently, her head nodding slightly, then turned her gaze to the two American men. For the first time, she spoke to them directly, her English clear and measured. "My name is Amelia. Ms. Sato has asked me to clarify her position, as it seems to have been misunderstood." She paused, letting the formal, slightly ironic statement land. "She feels it is time for you to understand why she has been silent." Mr. Tanaka gave Amelia a slow, respectful nod. He understood that his role as a professional interpreter was no longer sufficient. What was needed now was a cultural and emotional translator. Amelia turned back to Akari, who began to speak, her voice soft but resolute. She did not speak of profit margins or distribution networks. She spoke of her grandfather, a man who started with a single loom in a small wooden house in Gion after the war. She spoke of how he viewed his textiles not as products, but as stories woven with threads of history, nature, and human emotion. As Akari spoke, Amelia translated, her voice becoming a conduit for the younger woman's passion and conviction. "Ms. Sato's grandfather taught her that a business negotiation is not a battle to be won," Amelia began, her words painting a picture that stood in stark contrast to the aggressive corporate ethos of the Thorns. "It is a conversation to determine if two parties share the same heart, the same kokoro. He believes that if the heart is not aligned, no contract, no matter how detailed, can ever truly bind two people together." Amelia looked directly at Wallace Thorne. "She has been silent because she has been listening, not to your proposals, but to your character. She has been trying to see if the heart of Thorne Global aligns with the heart of Sato Textiles." "Character?" Landon scoffed. "We're talking about $1 billion. This isn't philosophy class." Akari's eyes flashed, and she spoke a sharp single sentence. "Dignity," Amelia translated, her voice as crisp as Akari's, "is an asset more valuable than your entire market capitalization. Ms. Sato came here tonight to determine if you possessed any. She believes you can learn more about a person from how they treat those they believe are beneath them than from any financial statement." A flush of angry red crept up Landon's neck. Wallace Thorne's expression hardened into one of pure, cold fury. They had been tested, judged, and found wanting. The realization was not humbling, it was infuriating. But shame was not an emotion Wallace Thorne trafficked in. He saw not a judgment, but a challenge. He saw her youth and her talk of heart and dignity as the ultimate weakness. He decided it was time to drop all pretense and move in for the kill. "Fine," Wallace said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's talk about the future then, not the past." He slid a heavy leather-bound folder from his briefcase and pushed it across the table. It landed with a definitive thud. "This is our final, non-negotiable offer. Let's not waste any more time with poetry. Have your waitress translate this." The insult was deliberate, meant to put Amelia back in her place. But it was too late. She was no longer just a waitress. She was Akari Sato's shield and her sword. Akari gestured for Amelia to examine the document. As Amelia picked it up, she felt the cold weight of the paper, filled with the dense, impenetrable language of corporate law. She began to read the key clauses aloud to Akari in Japanese, her voice slow and careful. As she did, she felt the impatient, predatory gaze of the Thorns. "Clause 4A is just a standard liability waiver," Landon interrupted dismissively. "You can skip that." Section 8, Wallace added, just outlines the transitional management structure, purely procedural. They were trying to steer her, to rush her past the traps they had laid. But something snagged Amelia's attention. She had spent countless late nights in the university library studying art history texts, learning to parse complex language and search for hidden meanings. She recognized the scent of deliberately ambiguous phrasing. "One moment," Amelia said, holding up a hand to the thorns before turning to Akari and switching to Japanese. "Sato-sama, karera wa isogaseu to shite imasu. Kono bubun no kotobazukai ga aime desu." "Ms. Sato, they are trying to rush us. The language in this section is deliberately vague." She pointed to the section Wallace had dismissed. "Dai hachiko wa tanaru kanri koso de wa arimasen. Anata no ojusama no isan o ubao tam no kayaku desu." Section 8 is not just a management structure. It is a contract to steal your grandfather's legacy. Akari's eyes narrowed. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod for Amelia to continue. "They call it the legacy clause," Amelia explained in Japanese, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and furious clarity. "It's not about management. It's an intellectual property clause written so broadly that it would give Thorn Global the unilateral rights to own, license, and profit from any and all future designs created by you or any designer at your company forever. They are not just buying your company, they are trying to buy your soul." Amelia was no longer just translating. She was fighting. She was defending. The two powerful men at the table suddenly seemed diminished, their expensive suits and sneering confidence nothing but cheap camouflage for their boundless greed. Wallace was growing visibly agitated. "What's the delay? What are you telling her? It is a standard succession clause. Just tell her to sign." Amelia met his icy glare, her own expression unyielding. "I am ensuring Ms. Sato understands the full and precise implications of every single word, Mr. Thorne. As you can appreciate, clarity is paramount when a family's entire history is on the line." Her use of formal corporate language, coming from a woman in a waitress uniform, seemed to stun him into a moment of shocked silence. Akari then posed a question in Japanese, her tone as calm and sharp as a shard of ice. Amelia translated. "Ms. Sato is curious about one more detail. She asks you to clarify the meaning of the addendum on page 12, which gives Thorn Global the right to rebrand and consolidate artisanal production lines for market efficiency." Landon waved a dismissive hand. "It's just streamlining, standard business practice, getting rid of redundancies." Akari spoke again, her words soft but carrying the weight of generations. Amelia's translation was precise, a killing blow delivered with a quiet voice. "Sato-sama wa shokunin no seisan rein to yuno wa hito no namae de aru to oshata imasu." Amelia's voice trembled slightly with the power of the words she was relaying. "Miss Sato says that her artisanal production lines have names. They are Mrs. Tanaka, who has woven silk for 60 years and whose mother taught her. They are Mr. Ishida, whose family has worked with natural dyes for 3 centuries. She says you are not talking about streamlining. You are talking about firing living masters of their craft and replacing them with machines." She asks, "Is this the heart of Thorn Global?" A single bead of sweat trickled down Landon Thorne's temple. He and his father were utterly exposed, their brutal corporate ethos laid bare against a backdrop of artistry and honor they couldn't comprehend. Akari Sato sat back in her chair, a picture of absolute composure. She took a delicate sip of her tea. For the first time all evening, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her lips. She had not been a lamb waiting for slaughter. She had been a hunter, patiently waiting for the predators to reveal their true nature. And Amelia realized with a jolt that Akari had understood everything from the beginning. Perhaps not every word of English, but she understood the language of greed, of disrespect, the silence, the deference, the reliance on a translator. It had all been the most elaborate, high-stakes character test imaginable. And now it was time for the final verdict. The atmosphere in the president's room had curdled. The heavy scent of success had been replaced by the stench of failure. Wallace and Landon Thorne were silent, their faces pale masks of fury and humiliation. They had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and morally defeated by the very woman they had dismissed as a delicate, ignorant girl. Akari Sato looked at Amelia and began to speak. Her Japanese was different now. The soft, formal tones were gone, replaced by a voice that was crisp, commanding, and utterly resolute. It was the voice of a CEO, a leader, a woman ready to protect her legacy at any cost. Amelia listened, her eyes wide. The instructions were precise, the message unequivocal. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and turned to face the two ruined men. "Gentlemen," Amelia began, her voice ringing with an authority that felt both borrowed and earned. "Ms. Sato has instructed me to convey her final decision." She let the words hang in the air, the silence stretching taut. "First," Amelia said, her gaze locking onto Wallace, "regarding your attempt to seize control of her future creative work under the guise of a legacy clause, Ms. Sato recognizes this as a blatant attempt to colonize her company's artistic spirit. She considers this not just a breach of faith, but an act of profound cultural vandalism." Wallace's face was ashen. "Second," Amelia continued, turning to Landon, "regarding your plan to consolidate her master weavers and dyers. Miss Sato wishes me to inform you that these people are not redundancies. They are the living soul of her company. The suggestion that their life's work could be sacrificed for market efficiency is, in her words, the philosophy of a barbarian." Landon looked as if he had been physically slapped. "And third," Amelia said, her voice dropping slightly, "regarding your offer of nearly $1 billion. Ms. Sato has instructed me to give you her formal response." She paused, looking from father to son, letting them absorb the full weight of their defeat. "The answer is no." But the masterstroke was yet to come. Akari spoke one final time in Japanese, a short, simple phrase. As she did, Mr. Tanaka, who had been a silent witness for the entire evening, reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, sleek, digital audio recorder. He placed it on the table and pressed a button. Wallace Thorne's voice, tinny and distorted, filled the room. "We're slipping in the legacy clause, Section 8C, the one that gives us full rights and royalties to all future designs. She's so focused on honoring the past, she'll never see we're stealing her future." Landon's voice followed, dripping with contempt. "Brilliant! She won't have a clue. She's a designer, an artist. She's not looking at the fine print." The recording played their entire whispered conspiracy, every greedy, dismissive word echoing in the opulent room like a verdict. When it finished, a profound, tomb-like silence descended. Wallace Thorne looked like a man who had just watched his entire empire crumble before his eyes. Landon was staring at the recorder as if it were a coiled snake about to strike. Akari Sato then did something Amelia never expected. She looked directly at Wallace Thorne, and in a voice that was quiet, laced with only the faintest, most elegant accent, she spoke her first English words of the night. "My grandfather did not survive a war and build a company from ashes so that it could be gutted by men with no honor. The shock was absolute. It was a thunderclap in a silent cathedral. She had understood them all along. She stood up, her small frame radiating an immense, unshakable power. Mr. Tanaka held her chair. She gave a slight, formal bow to Amelia. A gesture between equals, a silent acknowledgement of gratitude and shared victory that made Amelia's heart swell. Then, without another glance at the two men, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the wreckage of a billion-dollar deal and two reputations that were, for all intents and purposes, utterly incinerated. The sound of the door clicking shut was the loudest sound Amelia had ever heard. Amelia remained seated at the massive table, a solitary figure in a landscape of ruin. The silence left in Akari Sato's wake was heavy and suffocating, ringing in her ears with the sound of her own life imploding. The smell of expensive steak and old leather now seemed nauseating, the scent of a world she had just detonated. The Thorns had scrambled out in Akari's wake, a chaotic retreat of overturned water glasses and muttered curses, leaving the fraudulent contract on the table like a piece of evidence at a crime scene. The adrenaline that had felt like courage moments before now curdled into a cold, terrifying dread. She had spoken. She had sat down. She had defied a guest. No, she had systematically dismantled two of the restaurant's most powerful patrons. Her heart pounded a frantic three-word rhythm against her ribs. What have I done? The rule, the sacred pact of her profession, screamed in her mind. You are invisible. You are silent. She had not only been visible, she had been the central actor in the drama. The door to the president's room swung open with a violent shove. Her manager, Mr. Albright, a man whose face was perpetually pinched with anxiety, stood in the doorway. Tonight, his face was a mottled, unhealthy shade of purple, his eyes blazing with a fury that turned Amelia's blood to ice. "Amelia!" he hissed, the name a venomous dart. He didn't shout. It was worse, a low, controlled rage that promised utter destruction. "Do you have any idea, any concept at all, of what you have just done?" Amelia stood up, her legs feeling like hollow reeds. "Mr. Albright, I can explain." "Explain?" He let out a short, barking laugh, devoid of all humor. "Explain what? How you decided to abandon your post and play negotiator? I have Wallace Thorne's chief of staff on the phone screaming about lawsuits, breach of privacy, unprofessional conduct, corporate espionage. He's throwing every term he can think of at me. This restaurant, this institution, is built on one thing, discretion, and you, in 20 minutes, have set a torch to it." He advanced on her, his polished shoes sinking into the thick carpet. "You are fired, that is the least of it. I will personally see to it that you are blacklisted from every fine dining establishment, every hotel, every catering company in the city. You won't be able to find work serving coffee at a bus station. Now get your things and get out of my sight." Each word was a hammer blow, shattering the fragile structure of her life. Her tuition payment, due next week. Her rent, already a stretch. The dream of a quiet life surrounded by art. All of it vanished, replaced by the terrifying, immediate prospect of eviction and failure. She had acted from a place of deep conviction, of honoring her grandmother's memory, and her reward was absolute ruin. She opened her mouth, but no words came. What could she say? He was right. She had broken every rule. As she stood there, stripped of her dignity and her future, the door opened again, this time with a soft, deliberate click. Mr. Tanaka stood on the threshold. His presence was a pool of calm in the manager's stormy fury. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," Mr. Tanaka said, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that instantly silenced Mr. Albright's tirade. He stepped into the room, his gaze fixed on the manager. Ms. Amelia was not acting on her own. She was acting at the direct and explicit request of my employer, Mrs. Akari Sato. Mr. Albright blinked, his rage faltering. "What? That's impossible. She was providing a service of cultural and linguistic interpretation that this establishment was clearly unable to offer," Mr. Tanaka continued, his tone unwavering. He took another step forward, and Mr. Albright instinctively took one back. "As for Mr. Thorne's threats, I would advise him to be cautious. We have a digital recording of him and his son conspiring to commit contractual fraud. Our legal team in Tokyo has already been alerted. I assure you, Mr. Thorne will soon have far more pressing concerns than the conduct of a waitress." The color drained from Mr. Albright's face. The name Sato, which an hour ago had just been a name on a reservation, now landed with the full weight of a global corporation and its army of lawyers. Mr. Tanaka's attention shifted from the stunned manager to Amelia. The professional formality in his eyes was gone, replaced by a genuine warmth and a profound look of respect that felt more valuable than any paycheck she had ever received. "Ms. Sato would like a word with you. She is waiting in her car downstairs." He said it not as an order, but as a gentle invitation. He then glanced back at Mr. Albright. "See to it that Miss Amelia's personal belongings are gathered. I will provide an address for them to be sent. She will not be coming back." Without another word, he held the door open. Amelia walked past her former manager, who stood gaping, his authority utterly dismantled. She didn't look back. She walked through the main dining room, a ghost shedding her invisibility, aware of the whispers and stares of her former colleagues. On a service counter, she untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it down. a final symbolic act of departure. She followed Mr. Tanaka out of the restaurant's cloistered warmth into the crisp, cold air of the Chicago night. At the curb, a black, impossibly sleek sedan idled with a barely audible hum. It was not just a car, it was a silent statement of a different world. Mr. Tanaka opened the rear door. Amelia, feeling as if she were stepping into a dream, slid onto the soft leather seat. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing out the noise of the city, replacing it with a profound and unnerving silence. Across from her sat Akari Sato. The cabin lights illuminated her face, and Amelia could see the deep weariness in her eyes. The immense effort of the evening had taken its toll. "The silence," Akari began, her English quiet but steady. "It can be a lonely place. People mistake it for weakness, and they try to fill it with their own noise. Tonight you did not. You listened to the silence. You heard what was inside it." Amelia twisted her hands in her lap. I couldn't let them disrespect you like that. The things they said, it was like they were speaking about my own grandmother." Akari's lips curved into a soft, genuine smile. "I know. I saw it in your eyes long before you came to the table. I saw you flinch when Mr. Landon Thorne shouted. I saw your jaw tighten when his father began to conspire. I was testing them, it is true, but I was also watching you." She leaned forward, her intensity filling the small space. "My grandfather is dying, Amelia. This deal was not about money. It was about finding a partner to protect his legacy, to carry it into the future. I have learned tonight that I cannot find that partner here in America. Not yet. I must build it myself." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "To do that, I need someone here, a person of rare character, someone who understands both American ambition and Japanese heart, someone who values integrity more than profit, who can see the person behind the title." The words hung in the silent car, charged with unspoken possibility. "I am opening a North American office for Sato Textiles here in Chicago. Not just a sales office, but a cultural foundation. It will fund young artists and designers, and it will create apprenticeships to preserve traditional crafts. It is my true legacy. I want you to help me run it." Amelia's mind reeled. It was too much, too fast. "Me? I'm an art history student. I'm a waitress. I don't know anything about running a foundation." "You know about art," Akari countered gently, "and you know about legacy. You know about honor. That is more important than any business degree. Your education will, of course, be paid for. You will finish your degree and any graduate studies you wish to pursue after. You will be given a salary that will allow you to focus on your work without worry. I am not offering you a job as an assistant, Amelia. I am offering you a position as a guardian of my family's story." It was an offer of purpose, of meaning. It was an invitation to step out of the shadows where she had lived her entire life and into the light. The sheer scale of it was terrifying, a leap into an unknown so vast she couldn't see the other side. "Why me?" Amelia whispered, the question born of a lifetime of feeling ordinary. Akari reached across the space and for a fleeting moment rested her hand on Amelia's. Her touch was light, but it grounded Amelia in the surreal moment. "Because the thorns of this world, they see assets and liabilities," Akari said, her voice firm but kind. "They are blind. You see people. Tonight, in a room full of powerful men, you saw me when no one else did. That is not a skill you learn in a university. It is who you are. And in my world, that is a superpower. I do not need another executive. I need someone who can see." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, not of sadness or fear, but of a profound, overwhelming sense of being truly seen for the very first time. The years of quiet observation, of feeling like a ghost, had not been for nothing. It had all been training for this single, life-altering moment. A week later, Amelia sat in the small, sunlit apartment she had shared with her Obasan for so many years. On the table in front of her was a thick FedEx envelope. Inside was a formal employment contract, an advance on her new, unbelievable salary, and a plane ticket, a one-way ticket to Kyoto. She was to spend a month there, walking the gardens with Akari's grandfather, learning the history of every pattern, the story of every loom, before returning to Chicago to begin her new life. She picked up a small framed photograph from the mantelpiece, a faded image of a young American serviceman with his arm around a shy, smiling Japanese woman, her parents. Beside it was a more recent photo of her grandmother, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, her eyes full of quiet strength. She looked from the photos to the ticket in her hand. The journey ahead was terrifying and unknown. But for the first time in her life, she felt she was not a ghost, but a bridge between the world her parents had tried to build and the legacy her grandmother had given her. The silence was over. It was time to find her own voice. She took a deep, shaky breath, the air in the quiet apartment feeling charged with her future. And then she began to pack.